Hello, everyone. I am here with Professor Sawhney from Northwestern today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Taarini, and my name is Mohan Sawhney. I am on the faculty at the Northwestern Kellogg School of Management, where I serve as the Associate Dean for Digital Innovation. I also run the Center for Technology and Innovation and have a clinical appointment in marketing.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor Sawhney, for taking the time with us here today. And we're going to pick your brain on the adoption of different generative AI technologies. So my first question is, as a pioneer in digital marketing strategies, how do you see the landscape of digital marketing evolving with the integration of Gen AI technologies?
The generative AI, just in a broader sense, really shines when humans interact with AI in a conversational mode, right? As opposed to a classical machine learning application where, let's say, you're getting sensor data from a machine and that is being used to build a predictive model for maintenance. So in that case, that's a classical machine learning application. But generative AI, because it generates conversation, it generates data, text, it generates images, is really good at human AI interactions, right? That human AI interface. Now, when you think about marketing as a discipline, it's all about interacting with humans, with customers. So if you look at the whole life cycle of CX, or the customer experience management, from marketing to sales to customer service, these are phenomenal use cases for generative AI, because we are generating content, we're generating ways to interact with customers, we're generating offers and marketing assets. So, so generative AI tools, I think, are applicable across the entire spectrum of the digital marketers' jobs to be done. I like the jobs to be done framework here. So if you really look at what digital marketers do, they go through the whole life cycle of digital marketing. Starts with customer insights and customer understanding, then you build your segments and persona, then you kind of design and develop the offers and personalize offers for each customer, the customer segment. Then you design a marketing campaign, which includes both the choice of media as well as the creative, and then you do execution, and finally you do update monitoring and improvement of your marketing campaign. So that's sort of the life cycle of jobs to be done. And at each stage, uh, we can enhance sort of the productivity as well as the quality of the outcomes by using generative AI tools. So it's for instance, we can use generative AI tools in customer insight work by looking at how to redo the idea of surveys. So we used to do surveys in the old days, customer surveys, but now literally you can, just like you and I are having this conversation, imagine that this was a customer interview. And I could now do these interviews and surface the insights that emerge in real time using this one. So there's no need for a survey design. There's no need for sort of the structured interview process. So similarly, in persona creation or persona definition, you can feed the generative AI algorithms, and these are also available in, like, Copilot mode in platforms like Salesforce with Einstein or Microsoft Copilot, and you can use that to actually generate the persona. So we can go on and on, sort of, but that's the framework that I like to think about. That we will follow the life cycle of what digital marketers do, and then look at how each of those jobs can be enabled or enhanced by generative AI tools.
Thank you for going over the procedure. That really helped. So going off of that, if you could elaborate on the key strategies that companies should adopt to effectively integrate Gen AI into their operations.
So to think about how Gen AI can be sort of woven into the fabric of what a company does, I like to think of the use cases with a simple two by two framework that I found helpful. So the first dimension of the two by two is internal operations and workflows versus customer facing or external operations and workflows. The second dimension is sort of incremental versus the more transformational. outcomes. By the way, this is also correlated with risk and time frame, short, long time frame, less risky to more risky or more speculative types of things. So I think that becomes a useful way to structure and organize all the ways in which you can incorporate generative AI. So let's start, for instance, with the internal workflows and operations and incremental. So that can be anything from summarizing this meeting, right? Meeting notes to kind of like, content creation or, summarizing your emails or looking for, having, conversations with your documents and knowledge management, trying to understand, creating document summaries or doing data analysis from spreadsheets or doing sort of, so those are sort of the internal productivity or oriented workflows. Now, external facing, it might be, for instance, how you can create chatbots for selling as well as for servicing customers, and also outbound content creation and content assets and so on. The more speculative, the more sort of transformational stuff, will actually tends to get more industry specific. So, for example, if you look at investment management, financial services, then some of those sort of futuristic scenarios might, for instance, be a digital avatar of your wealth advisor who knows everything about you, and you can speak to them like a human advisor, and they will be able to guide you through all the investment decisions. So that is, those are examples of more. So when we get into the more transformational scenarios, we have to get industry specific, in drug discovery, or whether it's optimizing healthcare delivery, or whether it is law firms creating virtual law firms, or legal contract management automation and so on. So I find that the use cases and scenarios that are sort of more future looking tend to be more industry specific. Although there are instances where you can think about the next generation of customer care, for instance, which would be Gen AI powered bots that will assist you, just like humans might be. Or you might even have this idea that I played around my head with. It's the notion of a new B2B commerce, which is bot to bot commerce. So imagine that I create a digital twin of myself, which I am, and now with all my knowledge, my preferences, my shoe size, my color preferences, and so on, and then I can basically delegate my shopping to this bot or my avatar, which basically is like, and go buy me a black dress for the party that I'm having next week. You know what I like, and you know how much I want to spend. And this bot might negotiate with, say, Amazon's bot or the Nordstrom bot at the other end, and strike a deal. So this is almost like bringing the concept of financial services and trading into shopping. So what do we do when you do when you buy stocks? You put out a limit order and you say, I want to buy this share stock at between this price and this price for this period of time, and essentially there's an algorithmic matching of the buy side and the sell side. I think that's going to come to commerce. So we're probably going to have this idea of, I don't know whether I call it delegated commerce or silent commerce or bot to bot commerce. So really interesting speculative thing that can happen in the future.
That's fascinating. And that actually aligns with my next two questions. If you could kind of share your some of your insights or examples into how different industries like healthcare, I know you've gone over finance a little bit and manufacturing, and how they kind of uniquely leverage Gen AI to address their specific challenges. Like the digital avatar for wealth advising and investment management is fascinating, but also the healthcare space and other areas as well.
Yeah, so literally, as you go down each industry, you can find some really fascinating, use cases and examples. Let me take one based on recent experience or industry that you don't think about a lot in the context of AI or generative AI, and that is I worked with a small HVAC company, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. So they service commercial clients, both small and large buildings. So we identified all the possible ways in which we could use generative AI. And one of the things that we really zeroed in on was field service. So what happens in HVAC maintenance is that the technician will come and The customer says, "Well, my air conditioning isn't working." So they need to then diagnose the problem. They need to get to the root of the problem. They need to see, which parts need to be replaced and what are the fixes for the symptom, which is that the air conditioning isn't working. So that actually is a trial and error process, just like medical diagnosis. It takes and often you find this company finds that you have to send the technician out on repeated visits, multiple visits, and it's a very inefficient process. It costs the company money, it costs their clients money. So now imagine that you're able to take a picture of parts, and then by using an image library, they can sort of diagnose, okay, this part is broken, this is the fix, and this is the cost, and you can instantly generate a quote for the customer. So this is something, for instance, that a company called Aviros that we met in India, AWIROS, they are using this, basically they built a video kit using deep learning mechanisms. And one of their clients in this context is Pratt and Whitney. So in Pratt and Whitney, when they're doing engine maintenance, so literally they are able to take pictures of the engine and then sort of identify potential problem areas or parts that show wear and tear that can be improved. So as it goes, so that's sort of preventive maintenance and diagnosis in a variety of industries. If you look at law firms, in the legal area, the whole idea of CLM, contract lifecycle management, you can use generative AI now to generate contracts, to review contracts, to even negotiate contracts. In also, if you think about a horizontal function like procurement, RFPs, request for proposals, can be generated. You can respond to RFPs and generate RFPs, using generative AI tools. If you look at healthcare, areas like when a doctor interviews a patient and they're doing the assessment, so through voice recognition and voice bots and generative AI tools, you can now auto-populate the electronic health record for the patient and then just secure the doctor's final approval on the health records. So those are, examples industry by industry that you can use. One of my colleagues is working on a startup that's in the agricultural space, and they are using deep learning to techniques to, identify. You fly a drone over the field, and you can tell what nutrients it needs, what pests there might be, are the grapes in a vineyard ready for harvesting by doing this flyby. So in insurance, you can enhance sort of the whole assessment of claims fraud and claims investigation or claims servicing. And one point I want to make in this context is that generative AI doesn't sit in a vacuum. Generative AI tools are used in conjunction with, technologies like, traditional machine learning, deep learning. So for instance, the insurance application, one of the applications I looked at recently was after a hurricane, you could fly a drone over a neighborhood, and then based on the visual pictures of the roof damage, they can estimate in literally real time how many claims they're going to get and what is the value of the damage that has been done, right?
Oh,
Same
wow.
thing is being used by auto insurance companies where you can just take a camera pictures, take a camera and take pictures of your car after it's been an accident, and then based on the image recognition, it estimates the damage and actually issues you a check in real time without from claims adjustment. So those are actually not generative AI applications; they're deep learning applications. We're using machine vision.
Hmm.
But so we need to think about ML, deep learning, and generative AI as sort of a portfolio of AI technologies, and they will be used in combination and conjunction to deliver the best possible outcomes for customers.
Got it. That's an interesting perspective, not to kind of consider them as independent of one another, but kind of creating these sort of combinations that can help make human life easier.
And the combinations are of two types, Taarini. So the first type of combination is where you create a hierarchical sort of set of these technologies. Take customer service, for example. If a customer query comes in and it's a very structured query, what is my account balance, or for a bank, you don't need a generative AI tool for that, right? It can be handled using a structured chatbot, rule-based chatbot. But let's say it's the next level of query where you're asking an airline, what are the flights on July 16th if I want to travel from Orlando to to New York. So then it's like origin, destination, type of class, time of day, and then the bot says these are the flights available. That's a machine learning bot, level two. Level three is generative AI. Plan me a 1 week vacation to Italy, right? That's generative AI. And the fourth level is human being. So so in this case, what you do is you can put an orchestration layer at the front end, and as the query comes in, it's triaged and saying, is this a complex query or a simple query? Because you don't want to use generative AI for everything.
Yeah.
Because these are, first of all, these tools are expensive. And secondly, there's a possibility that they produce hallucinations. So, you need to put, but if it's a very structured, simple query, then you use a simple. So it's kind of this idea of mixture of experts, a mixture of models. That's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is that generative AI and traditional AI actually work in sequence. So for example, I was talking about the legal application. So in legal, we have used machine learning, particularly deep learning techniques for natural language understanding. So a startup that I advise called LawGeeks based out of Israel, they have built basically a tool for what they call automated contract review, right? So ACR, automated contract review essentially reads the contract and then uses natural language understanding to understand the semantic content and figure out what clauses are objectionable and what clauses are fine. So that's your application of machine learning, but specifically deep learning, to analyze a contract. But now, using generative AI tools, you can actually generate a contract,
Right.
right? You can write a contract.
Uh-huh.
So now this allows you to create a full life cycle tool. So whether it's automated contract review or automated contract generation, in the generation part you use generative AI, the review part you use traditional and natural language understanding. So lots of ways to combine these different technologies. And I think sometimes in the excitement of the shiny new object, which is generative AI, we tend to lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that all these tools will work in concert.
That's actually really very interesting. The kind of amalgamation of all of these tools together. It can be kind of also overwhelming for a lot of startups to implement which one kind of makes most sense. So the optimization of generative AI is something I'd like to get your thoughts on. How do you think, especially startups that are starting off pretty early and have limited funding, how do you think they can use these tools to better benefit them?
Well, I think that the tools are becoming more efficient, they're becoming more powerful, and they're becoming cheaper. So if you look at OpenAI's progression from GPT 3.5 to 4.0 to Turbo to 4.0, they've been slashing costs for processing the same number of tokens. They also have been, of course, increasing the power of the algorithm in terms of the type of analysis it can do and the accuracy, reducing hallucinations. So the tools are getting better and better, Moore's law working to your advantage. So as a startup now, but the other thing that has been done by these companies is that earlier there were concerns that your data would be used to train the model, your data would leak, but now they've built those protections in. So if you think about the OpenAI, for instance, they have ChatGPT Enterprise and they have ChatGPT for Teams, and those are industrial grade, enterprise level applications that give you that one-way data protection and and allow you to access the models using APIs or tokens as opposed to only prompts. So so I think it's becoming easier and cheaper. But as a startup, when you're thinking about how to incorporate generative AI, one of the important questions you need to think about is, am I going to go best of suite or am I going to go best of breed? So for instance, if you are a startup company and you want to do, personalization of your offers, of your product, right? Let's say you're an e-commerce startup, whatever. Well, you have a choice of leveraging Einstein out of Salesforce, if you have Salesforce for your Commerce Cloud or Sales Cloud or whatever. Or you can go to a dedicated kind of point solution that does personalized offers, right? So, so my take there is that as a startup company with limited resources, you're probably better off making a platform bet first, right? Pick a hyperscaler platform, pick a, sort of a Gen AI platform. So like, you could pick Salesforce, you could pick Adobe, or you could pick Microsoft Dynamics. So these are, all whatever. If you're slightly bigger, you can look at SAP and Oracle. So you have to make that bet first and kind of look at the tools that come out of the box with these platforms, which is a little bit less expensive than, looking at, say, Jasper as a content generation tool, and Synthesia as a persona creation tool, and so on. So the your bills can quickly grow if you have a number of point solutions. So as a startup, I would say first make a platform bet, and then use the tools that are available from the platform vendor, which will be part of your general license, and then look at add-ons as needed for, highly relevant specialized tools. I would not sort of start off with just looking at the best tool for every job, because then you might end up with a, you know department store of point solutions.
That's very important and great advice, I think, because if you look at different startups, they have these sort of tools that are not needed or are not very even pinpoint solutions either. And a lot of the times they kind of go waste and can be incredibly costly for a startup. So it would be optimizing which tools make the most
Right, and you're adding subscription fees for each of these tools. So when you add it all up, it starts to look expensive, and you're not utilizing each tool and fully leveraging your subscription. But on the other hand, if you have a subscription to a platform, and then you can add on these capabilities as needed, and sometimes they come as part of the core platform. That might be a better way to go.
Got it. That makes sense. I know you spoke about customer experiences a little bit, but and like the potential of Gen AI in enhancing those customer experiences, but if you could discuss more innovative ways to improve customer interactions and personalize those.
So, if you think about customer interactions, we've had this binary view of the world that there is either high tech or high touch, right? High touch is personalized, personal interaction, where you have a human being and they are, empathetic, they understand you, and so on. Or you have high tech interactions which are efficient, convenient, but they lack that sort of empathy and personalization element. So take Amazon as an example, or Netflix or Uber as an advantage of example of sort of tech-based uh, personalization. So now I think the intriguing possibility that generative AI offers is the kind of breaking of this dichotomy, right? That sort of busting this hard constraint that you can either that high tech or high touch. It's now already interestingly high touch enabled through high tech, if you will. So so the ability to have a DIY, do it yourself, or self service kinds of interactions with AI bots that actually are empathetic, are deeply personalized, and can be even more satisfying than dealing with a human being. That is a very, very interesting possibility. I'll give you an example of a startup that I'm working with. The company is called MindBank.ai. MindBank builds digital twins. So essentially, you train the bot, and it learns more and more about you, and it knows your preferences, it knows your emotions, and so on. And they're using it for mental health counseling.
Hmm.
So in mental health counseling, so that bot, when you have conversations with the bot, it actually has something called a twinning score. Twinning score is the extent to which the twin knows about you, and it shows you that, hey, you gotta teach me more, you gotta tell me more about. So it has conversations with you, and you speak to it on a regular basis. So not only does it take your voice and convert it into text and train the algorithm, it actually picks up to 56 psycholinguistic voice markers. It can pick up depression, stress, anger, disgust, and surprise, and so on in your voice. So
Wow.
based on that, it actually forms a very nuanced picture of your mental health or your mental status, and then it presents the therapist with all this analytics. So you can actually say, "Hey, Taarini, on Tuesday last week, you had a depression episode. What was it? Let's talk more." But then you seem to have recovered over the next 3 days. So I can actually now look at them, and they plot these charts and so on. So that's an example of how the therapist is not substituted for the AI by the AI, but they are augmented, they are enhanced. So now I can have, so, uh, in the absence of the AI, how would it look? Let's say I see my therapist every 2 weeks. I go, well, the first 15 minutes is spent on, okay, so how was the last 2 weeks? And what happened? And tell me. Now all that preamble is done. In fact, the data is before the therapist, and you walk in there like, let's talk about this incident that happened 8 days ago. So, and by the way, in cases where the therapist is not available to you, on a 7 by 24 basis, you can get advice from the bot because the bot actually knows a lot about you. So those are ways in which you can build deeply personalized and empathetic interactions by learning more and more about customers. However, there has to be a catch, and the catch here is there are very, very complicated privacy uh, and data security questions that arise. I mean, imagine if this digital twin knows so much about me and somebody hacks my digital twin, then not only is my identity out there, my social security number, but they know they can act like, feel like me. They can actually create a fake, deep fakes of me, videos based on that information. And so there are some really interesting questions that we have to think about in the context of privacy, data security, and like who manages the my digital twin, which vault do I lock it up in, and how do I make sure there's no unauthorized access? So there'll be some really interesting questions around privacy and data security that will emerge here.
Thank you for sharing. That is a very fascinating use case, and it really democratizes this sort of access to just expressing one's emotions, especially given.
Access to expertise. By the way, this is not just, I gave you a mental health example, but I am also, for instance, training that I'm using that technology to build a digital twin. I've built a digital twin that knows everything I know about product management. So I trained it based on all my articles, my videos, my case studies, and everything. So using a RAG pipeline, they basically built this digital twin. So now you can basically talk to me and ask any questions related to product management. So what this does generally, it will democratize access to expertise of any kind. you know you can talk to, so let's say that you are a believer of Sadhguru in India, who's a spiritual leader. Well, Sadhguru will build a digital bot and you can get spiritual advice from him. You can build Deepak Chopra's digital twin and you can get, you can get financial advice. Professional consultants will get coded into digital bots. So imagine talking to like a virtual McKinsey or whatever. So this idea that the world's knowledge and the world's expertise can actually be made available to anybody in a democratized and in an on-demand fashion. That's a very powerful notion.
Wow. And I think you said it very correctly, equalizing access to expertise, all
Mhm.
sorts of expertise. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really
I mean,
great.
today, if you wanted to, attend a seminar by one of these spiritual leaders, or you wanted to hire a McKinsey consultant, or you wanted to talk to a senior partner at a law firm, it's very expensive. But now, imagine I could speak to their avatar
Wow.
for much
Yes.
cheaper and also more conveniently on demand.
On demand. Yeah. Convenient, cheaper, a lot of things. Actually, this is a good segue to my next question. With this sort of rapid adoption of Gen AI, what do you think are the primary ethical and legal considerations that businesses need to address to ensure the responsible use of these technologies?
Well, I think there are a number of issues, complex legal and ethical issues. It starts with intellectual property and copyright. So as you know, all these models are trained on training data, and the training data has not necessarily been made full transparency is not in the context of how these models were trained is not available. So there have been debates and there are lawsuits like the New York Times lawsuit, the recent. So there other providers, other model builders, foundation model companies have been sued or have been questioned in terms of how they're getting their training data and how they're assigning credit for copyright and on the question if I produce a painting that is based on the work of artists that have gone before, but they don't get any royalties or credits. It's a sort of an interesting and complex question. There are some innovative ways that I'm seeing this being dealt with. Adobe has announced recently that as they are building their image-based sort of the generative AI tools, like part of Firefly, their platform, they're actually asking people to contribute images and they will be paid royalties. So I think that potentially content creators will get royalties, just like Spotify gives you royalties,
Right.
but royalties for accessing my data for training, right? So
Mm.
today I think that the open AIs and Anthropics of the world, they're getting like a free pass by using training data for free. But I think eventually this might become uh, more of like a pay.
So way to monetize data.
Yeah, way to monetize because content creators can now monetize. So those are one set of questions. Then, of course, there are questions around the accuracy and bias and hallucinations. AI makes
Misinformation.
mistakes. Generative AI makes mistakes, and sometimes these mistakes. And by the way, today these mistakes we can laugh on about, right? Putting glue in your pizza, as Gemini suggested.
Yeah,
That's
I've
kind of
seen that.
funny because they pulled it from a Reddit joke. But tomorrow, if you're making life and death decisions and it's coming up with erroneous things, then that's much more consequential. So as we think about putting generative AI into production, into like day-to-day use, then it's got to be rock solid, and we're not there yet, right? So that's another set of challenges. Then there's also the issue of bias and fairness, and if your training data is biased, you can make biased decisions. It's not representative. And then, of course, there's the challenge of kind of the models themselves being tricked or jailbroken, and bad actors trying to hack into the models. So that, of course, requires you to do a bunch of red teaming and adversarial sort of robustness testing. So those are some of the issues that we will need to wade through, and of course, in that context, we also need to think about how should generative AI be regulated. What is the right level of regulation? What is the right method and process of regulation? Complex questions that both the EU and the US are dealing with right now. So I think that this will be a messy path, and through trial and error, we'll figure our way out from here. So it's kind of like generative AI is, it wouldn't be too much of an exaggeration to say that it is kind of like the splitting of the atom that we figured out sort of a phenomenal new force. Now it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It can blow mankind up or it can generate nuclear energy for us. But one thing is clear that the genie is not going back into the bottle, that we can't stop this revolution. What we got to do is to harness it responsibly.
Interesting. I have two questions about that. A lot of people are discussing that the government should be held responsible to kind of put some sort of standardized framework that helps ensure privacy concerns. What are your thoughts on that to regulate um, responses of Gen AI? Maybe not so much the adoption.
Well, I think that the government can put some guardrails around this. For instance, in the EU AI Act, they have classified sort of low risk, medium risk, and high risk type of AI application, and the burden of proof and transparency and evidence of how the models are being built and trained is greater as you go up the risk spectrum. So I think that obviously is useful to put guardrails around the scenarios. However, we need to appreciate that the government cannot get into the business of evaluating all the responses and the quality of the algorithms. They're not going to be able to go do stress testing and uh, you know just like the SEC does on financial accounts. They're not going to monitor. So it's more a question of how the models are built and how they are used, and putting some guardrails and regulatory frameworks around that. So I think that will happen. So you will probably not get a license to operate a large language model, across the country without sort of proving that the foundation of that it was built in was solid. Well, it's a difficult task for government. I think that there's also speculation that let's say that I do create a digital vault where I have all of my information. Maybe that should be managed by the government
Hmm.
as the trusted entity that will keep your information. But do you trust your government with your information? And that has many different answers depending on where you're at. Would you do this in an authoritarian regime? Do they know so much about you? So I'm not sure that we want the government so deeply involved with our lives.
Hmm.
Uh, but we do want them to create the regulatory framework and the guardrails within which generative AI can prosper.
That makes sense. That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, I think that is a concern. People are worried if the government should be this involved and engaged with our lives. Given your experience and observation of AI's evolution, how do you see the role of Gen AI evolving in the next 5 years versus the next 10 years? And, maybe even in creating competitive advantages for business.
So you have to appreciate that time frames in the AI world generally, and if you look at AI algorithmic capacity, are exponential. So we are progressing through orders of magnitude very, very quickly. By some indications from GPT-2 to GPT-4o, we have climbed 6 to 7 orders of magnitude, right? So generative AI and algorithmic capacity is following Moore's law, but estimates suggest that doubling time is as little as 4 months, as opposed to 12 to 18 months in Moore's law. So I just read a recent report called Situational Awareness. It's a document I think everybody should look at. It was written by a former OpenAI executive. And he has these graphs of exponentiating capacity. And it is scary. It is absolutely, it is so, I mean, 5 years, I mean, by 2027, he's saying that generative AI algorithms will have today, the GPT-4o is about as smart as a high schooler. GPT-3 had the elementary schooler kind of level of intelligence. They're saying by 2027, we're talking about AI PhD level researchers. All the tasks that they do can be done. So, because between now and 2027, we're going up another 3, 4 orders of magnitude. So, we're talking about models that will be 10,000 times better. So, when you ask me about 5 years, 5 years, they're actually talking about that takes us almost to 2030. They are actually talking about achieving singularity and AGI by then, right? So, artificial general intelligence. And it seems that the artificial general intelligence was a far-fetched and a distant goal, but it's like what your car says: object in the rear view mirror are closer than they appear. So the future isn't where it used to be. So if you ask me 10 years, I have no idea. In 10 years, I can't even project. It's like asking me to do an extrapolation that will be, 100,000 times. What if AI was 100,000 times more powerful? That's just 5 orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So it's mind-boggling the pace at which the technology is moving. And I think that the gating factor is not technology, it's not the algorithm, it is society, it is regulation. It's what we will allow AI to do. It's not what AI can do. So, and of course, there are other implications of this that forecast also suggests that by 2026, more than 20% of the entire US energy consumption will be needed to run generative AI data centers.
Oh, wow.
So just even the carbon footprint and the amount of energy that is going to be used. These when we look into the future, all I see is exponentiation. And it's just very hard for the human mind to even grasp what that exponential vertical kind of capability enhancement looks like. So I have no idea beyond 5 years where will we be. It's scary, and yet a intriguing view of what the world might look like.
Yeah, makes sense. I think to provide like more of a holistic view, what are some of the biggest challenges you think companies face when implementing these sort of AI strategies, and how do you think they can overcome these hurdles?
People and change management, right? We forget that technology is not a technology system; it's a socio-technical system. So it's the people, I like to joke, it's the people that get in the way. So change management, what sort of jobs will be needed in the future? What roles? What skills? How are you going to reconfigure your workforce, reskill it and upskill it, and reassign people? Think of companies like AT&T and T and Verizon that have tens of thousands of people in call centers. What happens to those jobs? What are the new skills? And by the conversely, what are the new skill sets that will be needed? So there's a huge shift or displacement coming in terms of skill sets and even structure of organizations and role. The nature of cognitive work is being transformed. So for business leaders, the biggest challenge is to get a handle on, okay, what does my workforce look like tomorrow? What are the skills that are going to be needed? How do I redeploy people? How do I, and if I'm going to need less people, what happens to those people? So I think that is the biggest challenge. The other thing is that so far people have been running a lot of proof of concepts and experiments with generative AI, but as you put this into production at scale, the costs are significant. Now you need to start worrying about the ROI. We haven't heard a lot about ROI of generative AI model. We assume that it's all good. But no, the costs add up because these are expensive tools, expensive algorithms. The carbon footprint is high. The compute requirements are significant. So you'll start to now think, you have to think more carefully about the ROI that you get. And you might not use the most powerful model for everything. This idea that I was talking about before, where you'll have to ensemble your models, you'll have to tier them. So that sort of economics of generative AI is another thing we need to worry about. And then I think getting to production scale uh, in a large organization, that's not easy. So it's one thing to run a small pilot, it's another thing to kind of scale it to like hundreds of millions of customers and so on. So that cost benefit economics, scalability, and change management, those are some of the challenges that I see.
I see. Got it. That was my last question. I always like to end with this sort of open-ended question, but I love asking everyone who's very established in their career journey, what advice would you give someone who is just entering college or a high school student? This could be any sort of advice, something that you would like to share with the next generation.
So I think it is becoming very challenging to understand where the entry level jobs will be after you graduate from college. So what I suggest is that you you arm yourself with some survival skills. I think the seductive logic of generative AI models, I can use a foundation model to now do my statistical analysis. So I can ask it to run, you know, write code for me. But it is important to understand how these models work. So the fundamentals, so equipping yourself with the fundamentals of linear algebra, mathematics, statistics, econometrics, all those sort of foundational disciplines. So my point is that, just because you have a scientific calculator doesn't mean you don't understand how arithmetic operations and trigonometry and logarithms actually work.
Yeah.
So I think STEM and those fundamental skills of data analysis, of understanding sort of, at the end of the day, what is the neural network? It's matrices and matrix algebra. You need to understand how all that works. So that's one thing that I would recommend. The other thing I would say is that you want to actually immerse yourself into these tools and start using them in your day-to-day life and become conversant with them. And then third thing I would say is that if the answers are all out there and it's democratized, you know what becomes important? It's the questions. Learn how to ask questions, learn how to query, learn how to do prompt engineering. And over in general, the biggest asset that a young person can have, a skill, is curiosity. Be curious, right? You sort of you can get any answer you want. The really important thing is what are the right questions to ask. So that's what I would ask the younger generation to do.
I see. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Sawhney. We really loved the deep dive in Gen AI adoption and implementation and loved hearing your thoughts and perspectives.
Thank you. It's been wonderful talking with you.